Good morning. Now we finally get to start. Okay. You heard a lot on Friday. We were here for a long time Friday, and you got all these hypotheticals, and now is the opportunity to kind of give you like a little lead-in, a little preview into what this trial is going to be about. Mr. Staten and I, we represent the state of Texas, and like we talked about in voir dire, we're the ones with the burden, and we're going to ask you to hold us to that burden, and we're going to ask you to make us prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And what we anticipate that this trial will be about over the next couple of weeks is that you'll hear from this witness stand that on May 28th, 2017, John Hernandez, 24-year-old man, went out to play soccer. He had a couple of drinks, and then he went home to his wife. We got home, and they decided that they were going to go eat. And they were going to go eat at Denny's. They were going to go eat at the Denny's at 17225 Crosby Highway in Harris County, Texas. And when they got to that Denny's, I anticipate that you'll learn that when they got there, there was a disagreement with the gentleman outside. They exchanged some words, but you will see, because we will bring you video evidence, surveillance from Denny's, that shows that after that disagreement, Mr. Hernandez places his hand on his daughter. They walk into the Denny's. They sit down, they place an order. He talks to some people that are in the Denny's, some employees from Denny's. They'll come to you and they'll tell you, say, yeah, he talked to us. He had on a soccer shirt of his favorite team, the Chivas. And he offered to give his shirt to those employees. And they're like, no, man, keep your shirt. A real friendly, real cordial conversation. And then, and I don't know how else to put this, but it's at this point that Mr. Hernandez makes what I can only classify as a fatal decision. He gets up and he goes outside the Denny's. And he walks into the parking lot and he walks to the back of his truck. And it's a relatively empty parking lot. And he turns and faces away from the main entrance. And he goes to the restaurant. And while he's doing that, you will see on the video surveillance that there is some lights that shine on the side of his truck. And there's a vehicle that you don't see in one camera, but you see in another. And inside that vehicle is the defendant. And you'll hear that when he pulls up, he's about 4 to 5 parking spaces away. And you'll see his demeanor when he gets out of his car. And he starts yelling at Mr. Hernandez. You'll hear the statement that the defendant gave that night about what he said to Mr. Hernandez. And we'll show you the video, the video surveillance that says once he started yelling, you'll see on the video, Mr. Hernandez, he's not really paying attention. He's walking across the parking lot, he's got his head down. He's walking back toward the entrance of the Denny's, back across this 4 to 5 parking spaces to the entrance of the Denny's where his wife and daughter are sitting. But the defendant has strategically placed himself in the way. As he's yelling at John Hernandez that night, he has placed himself blocking the path from this man to get to his family. And you will hear about the confrontation that ensues after that. You will see the confrontation that ensues after that. You will hear about the confrontation that ensues after that. And what you will hear is that within seconds of that confrontation, the defendant has the upper hand. He has taken John Hernandez, hurled him over his shoulder, and thrown him on his back. And he's on top of him. And he's striking him. And then, within seconds of the confrontation beginning, he places what you will hear in the defendant's own words as a chokehold on Mr. Hernandez. And he has this chokehold for the first minute, and the second minute, and the third minute of this altercation that he's dominating. And he's still holding that chokehold in the fourth minute, and the fifth minute, and the sixth minute of this confrontation that he's dominating. He continues to hold this chokehold until it is confirmed that Mr. Hernandez is no longer breathing. Upwards of 15 minutes with what's in the defendant's words as a chokehold. Now, we'll bring you some evidence from a medical examiner, Dr. Gonsolin, and another doctor, Dr. William Smock, and they will explain to you what this chokehold actually did physically. They will explain to you what the physiological effects of cutting off the blood to someone's brain is. They will explain to you how that is an act clearly dangerous to human life, to hold somebody in this chokehold, in this strangulating hold for upwards of 15 minutes. We're going to show you those things. They're going to come in from the witness stand. They're going to come in through documentary evidence. Those are the smallest piece of the puzzle that you guys are going to need to figure this thing out, because you have the largest piece. And the largest piece is your common sense. And all that we ask is that you use that common sense. And when we start plugging this evidence in, and we start showing you what happened over that 15-minute period, and you hear the doctors talk about the effects of what happens to the body over that 15-minute period, that you put all that together, that you synthesize that all into one, and you see that on May 28th,
it's the same rephrase.
we would ask that you listen to the evidence. And at the end of the day,
Your Honor, argue their was actually perverted.
Rephrase.
that you hold us to our burden. We submit that we'll get there. Thank you.
Good morning. I very rarely make notes for opening, but I wanted to make sure I was very accurate at this point of the evidence that you're going to see. I think you've heard what Mr. Johnson perceives to be the evidence as he views it, using terms like Mr. Hernandez was playing soccer and had a couple of drinks. He was cordial and friendly and made a fatal mistake of urinating in the parking lot. Well, I would submit to you this is a case about two fathers who come in contact over 22 minutes about a year ago. One of those fathers is a young man with a 3-year-old daughter, presently unemployed but working, trying to get his own business going, and lives with his girlfriend, the mother of the child. The other father is a 42-year-old with 3 teenage children. He's worked for a long time for the railroad, is married. And the 2 fathers, they've never met. They don't know each other. The first father, well, they both spend that Sunday. May 28th is a Sunday. They both spend that Sunday how they like to spend their Sundays. The first, the young man, spends his Sunday watching soccer all day, drinking and getting drunk. Not at home, not with his family. The other one, he spends his Sunday at a family reunion with everybody in his family all day, playing volleyball and all the other things that you do. The first father, the young man, after he gets done, comes home late, loads up his 3-year-old in the truck and his girlfriend, and proceeds to commit a felony. Driving while intoxicated with the child in the car to go down to the Denny's. And this is where I want to make some notes, because we'll be able to tell these times from the evidence that comes in, the surveillance videos and all the cell phone 911 calls. We can be able to put actual times on this. And this is where the 22 minutes starts. At 11:18 p.m., the young father pulls into the parking lot of the Denny's, gets out, and immediately another person, another patron, walking out of the restaurant notices him and is alarmed that this clearly intoxicated man is stepping out of the car and taking his baby out of the car. He's watching it. Mr. Blake Wise, you'll hear him testify. And as he's watching this, the young man's response to him is to say, "Hey, what are you looking at? What's the problem?" And begins to yell at Mr. Wise. Mr. Wise is a bit alarmed about this. And I believe Mr. Wise will testify that this man continues to yell at him, slapping his arms and making hand gestures like he wants to fight. So much so that the young man's girlfriend steps in and holds him from going after Mr. Wise. Now this is the slight disagreement that Mr. Johnson was telling you about. Had a couple of words with this other person in the parking lot. A disagreement, I think he said. This continues until the young father yells at Mr. Wise, quote, "If you got a problem, I got a 40 cal in the truck, and I'll show you." That's what the young father does. That's the slight disagreement that Mr. Johnson is going to show you. Mr. Wise, he's scared. Goes to his truck, calls 911, and says exactly what I just told you. And you'll hear that. "Hey, there's this clearly drunk guy in the parking lot with the baby in the car, and he's threatening me with a gun." That's the young man, the young father. You'll see on surveillance. His girlfriend continues to pull him, trying to get him to go into the Denny's. They're pushing and shoving. And then when he does finally go into the Denny's, everybody in the Denny's says, "Yeah, he was drunk. He was clearly drunk. No question." And the cordial and friendly conversation he has with the other guys, yeah, he does, as an intoxicated person might say, "Yeah, I'll give you my shirt." And they're like, no, that's okay. No problem. And then all of a sudden he abruptly gets up and starts going towards the front door. Whereas his girlfriend gets up, and I believe that testimony will bear out, that she got up because she was worried that he was going to leave. So she goes to the front door and gets his keys so he doesn't drive off. tries to get him to come back in, but doesn't. And then he goes out to the middle of the parking lot and decides to relieve himself. The evidence will show you that young father is John Hernandez. Now, about this same time, when this is going on with Mr. Wise, the other father, he's coming home with his teenage daughter, 2 friends of hers, teenage girls. They're coming home from the family reunion in one car, and his wife is kind of trailing with their young son, their other teenage daughter, and a friend of the son's. And they've agreed, it's late, we're tired, let's get something to eat, let's stop at Denny's on the way home. The evidence is going to show you that father is Mr. Terry Thompson. And at 11:24, Terry Thompson pulls into the Denny's parking lot and he parks. Teenage girls get out, and the girls see Mr. Hernandez urinating in the middle of the parking lot, and as teenage girls do, one giggles, one points, and the other one kind of looks away embarrassed. Nothing exciting about that. And yes, Terry Thompson says, "Hey, pal, you can't do that in the middle of the parking lot. I got teenage girls. Take it inside. Go inside and go to the bathroom." Now, the state has characterized him going to the bathroom as the fatal mistake. His fatal mistake that night. I would submit to you what he does next, and from then on, are the fatal mistakes. He's made a lot of mistakes up to now. But the fatal mistake is his response to Mr. Thompson telling him, "Hey, you can't do that," is to approach Mr. Thompson, to yell at him, to shove him, and then he commits an aggravated assault on him by balling up his fist and smacking him in the eye. That's what happens. Now, the state has suggested to you Mr. Thompson strategically put himself in the way of Mr. Hernandez from him entering the Denny's. You'll get to decide that. But there's no question, Mr. Hernandez, his response was to assault this guy for saying, "Hey, you can't publicly urinate and expose yourself to my daughters and everybody else out here." And once that happens, what happens? Mr. Thompson reacts and defends himself, and everybody else standing out there, and the fight's on. And they scuffle, and they fight amongst themselves. And at 11:27, Mr. Thompson finally gets the best of Mr. Hernandez and gets him in somewhat of a submissive hold on top of him, arm around his neck area. And tells him, "Stop. Stop fighting." And people come out and say, "Let him up." And he says, "I'm not letting this guy up until the cops come. Not I'm going to kill him. Not I'm going to make him pay. I'm going to hold this guy down until the cops come." Because right now he's got the tiger by the tail. He's got a guy who he thinks is dangerous, has assaulted him, and he's holding on to him. And he's holding on, and this guy is doing everything he can to get up. He's fighting back. He's trying to bite him. He's trying to grab him. He's kicking his legs from the very beginning. And about that time, people see this. And what are their reactions? You'll hear from them. You'll see it on the video. What do? They call 911. They yell at Mr. Thompson. They yell at each other. They start videotaping. They argue with each other. But you know what no one does? Is actually go over there and do anything about it. No one goes over there and tackles him, pushes him off, anything like that. And why? Because they know. He's got the tiger by the tail. What's he going to do? Let him go? What's going to happen then? We don't know. And then at 11:33, Terry's wife arrives. And that's when we get a very brief glimpse of this entire event up close. Is about 53 seconds of video, cell phone camera video. And even in that, they're telling Mr. Hernandez, stop. Stop. He doesn't. He continues. Terry even threatens, do you want me to hit you again? Stop it. He doesn't hit him. But he's saying, stop this. And in that brief glimpse, that 53 seconds, it shows that Mr. Thompson did not have his entire weight on Mr. Hernandez, because you can see his knees on the ground, and you'll see the evidence will show his own knees were scraped up. So he didn't have all his weight on him. He had his right arm out and his forearm on the ground supporting himself, and he had his left hand around to his elbow right here. That's, his arms do not move in that 53 seconds. Now I ask you, and I will show you, that is not a strangulating hold. That's how much room was in there for the entire time. That evidence is also going to show he didn't have his right hand locked behind him, trying to exert pressure. During that time, Mr. Hernandez had his right hand up and hanging on to Mr. Thompson's hand. And you'll see even in that short time, Mr. Thompson several times kind of lets go and lifts up and puts his hand back down. You'll see on that video several times that Mr. Hernandez, lower body, is free enough to turn his entire hips up off the ground and struggle. He's not compressed. The evidence, the video will also show that Mr. Thompson's, whatever body weight was on him, was on Mr. Hernandez's lower part of his body, his lower back, not his chest. Now, again, that evidence is a brief snippet. But at 11:40, approximately, Chauna Thompson, Terry Thompson's wife, says, "Hey, I don't think he's breathing, stop." They turn him over, and she begins chest compressions immediately, trying to revive him. And close to that time, EMS is arriving, law enforcement is arriving. And I believe the evidence will show at that time that there's a full and complete investigation of what's going on. There's numerous police officers out there. Every single witness is detained. I don't want to say detained. They don't leave. They give written statements, video statements, and audio statements. Every single one of them. They ask, do you have any videos? Look at cell phones. They do a complete investigation. They get the surveillance tapes of the Denny's and secure that. Anything and everything law enforcement should do to investigate any kind of incident like this. Mr. Hernandez is taken from EMS, by EMS, to the hospital. And then law enforcement was advised that the district attorney's office would be accepting criminal charges on Mr. Hernandez for assaulting Terry Thompson. That a 2B warrant would be issued because he wasn't in custody, he was going to the hospital instead. And 3 days later, on June 1st, Mr. Hernandez is taken off of life support and passes away. Now, I believe that the evidence will show that the mere fact that this struggle lasted as long as it did indicates that Mr. Thompson had no intention of killing Mr. Hernandez. If he had an intention of killing Mr. Hernandez, a chokehold would have him unconscious in 15 to 20 seconds. I believe that's what the evidence will show. I believe the evidence will show if he intended to suffocate him through an air choke, that would take no more than a minute maximum. The mere fact that it lasted 15 minutes is that he was simply trying to subdue somebody that would not submit. I too am going to ask you to hold the state to their burden. Very much so. And I look forward to presenting our case to you as well. Thank you.